are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
A very good afternoon and welcome to the Briefing PM, an hour of the latest political news, debate and analysis here on GB News. I'm Darren McCaffrey and here's what's coming up over the next hour. Yet again, only one big story in time. The leadership contest for the Conservative Party is well and truly underway, with nominations closing in just 3 hours' time. MPs need the backing of 20 fellow members of Parliament to get on the ballot paper ahead of that first round voting tomorrow. Who will manage to get over that threshold? We'll be speaking to Tory MPs and party insiders throughout the programme. Significantly, the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, has withdrawn from the race today and endorsed Rishi Sunak, while Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nadine Dorries pledged their support for the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss campaign. Meanwhile, Priti Patel in the last hour has announced she's not standing at all. Could others now drop out of the race before the close of play tonight? And this might be why, in terms of Priti Patel, having to deal with big issues still as Home Secretary, because 1,000 people have crossed the Channel in less than a week. That might make it more difficult for the Armed Forces Minister James Heappey, who's facing a grilling from MPs right now on the use of the military to counter migrant crossings. We'll have the latest from our Home Affairs and Security Editor Mark White, who'll be cutting through the noise. And as always, do get in touch with your views. Lots of campaigns launched today. Who's got your backing in this leadership race? GBViews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at GB News. It's going to be a fast-moving, exciting programme between now and 4 o'clock. But first, at the top of the hour, let's bring you up to date with the very latest news.
A very good afternoon. It's just a couple of minutes past 3. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Pressure is on the Conservative candidates to secure enough nominations to formally enter the race to replace Boris Johnson as leader of the Conservative Party. Home Secretary Priti Patel has confirmed she won't be standing. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps bowed out this morning and gave his support to the former Chancellor Rishi Sunak. It leaves 10 contenders who need the support of 20 MPs by 6 p.m. today. 3 have officially launched their campaigns, with speeches and tax policies being central. Former Chancellor Rishi Sunak said he would lower the tax burden, but only when inflation's been brought under control.
My message to the party and the country is simple. I have a plan to steer our economy through these headwinds. We need a return to traditional Conservative economic values, and that means honesty and responsibility, not fairy tales.
Prominent Tory backbencher Tom Tugendhat is promising to provide a new sense of direction to the party.
We need leadership with a renewed sense of mission. Leadership that sees beyond divisive politics and delivers results. Leadership that will return government to the service of our economy, our people and our country. We need...
Former Equalities Minister Kemi Badenoch launched her campaign by saying her focus would be on telling the truth.
Governing involves trade-offs, and we need to start being honest about that. Unlike others, I'm not going to promise you things without a plan to deliver them. People are sick of that. They're crying out for honesty.
Meanwhile, the Labour Party's put forward a motion to hold a confidence vote in the government. The official opposition says Boris Johnson should have left Number 10 immediately after he resigned as Tory leader last week. If the ballot goes ahead, expected to be tomorrow, all MPs can vote on whether the Conservatives stay in power. If the government loses, it could trigger a national election. In other news now, the government's announced a £1 billion plan to rebuild 61 schools. In James Cleverly's first announcement as the new Education Secretary, he said schools would receive state-of-the-art refurbishments. The investment will provide thousands of pupils with more modern classrooms, as well as new sports halls, music rooms and science labs. Japan has said goodbye to its former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was assassinated last week. Amid a heavy police presence, close family and friends of Japan's longest-serving premier attended a private funeral service in Tokyo. Abe was shot while he was making a speech at a campaign event. After the ceremony, a hearse carrying the body was accompanied by police on a procession throughout the city. Heathrow Airport has introduced a cap on the number of daily passengers that can pass through its terminals. The measure has been introduced as the airline industry struggles to deal with demand. Between July and September, no more than 100,000 passengers will be able to depart per day from the airport in West London. The Queen has presented the George Cross to the NHS at Windsor Castle. The monarch and Prince Charles welcomed NHS bosses and a frontline worker from each of the 4 UK nations. Well, the award recognises acts of great heroism and courage, particularly in the face of extreme danger. Downing Street says significant work is being done to protect the most vulnerable during the heatwave. A spokesperson says planning's underway within the NHS, local councils and transport networks. It's after the Met Office issued an amber alert for extreme heat for Sunday, covering most of England and parts of Wales, warning of possible dangers to life. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to the briefing with Darren.
Rosie, thank you very much indeed. It is coming up to 7 minutes past 3 o'clock on this Tuesday afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Well, the race to replace Boris Johnson is down to 10 candidates today. That's after the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, withdrew from the race, and the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, who was once a favourite of Tory party activists, confirms she is not standing. So the 10 people who could be Prime Minister are frontrunner Rishi Sunak, the former Chancellor, who is somewhat out in the lead amongst MPs, certainly at the moment, receiving the backing of people like Dominic Raab today, and, of course, Grant Shapps. Penny Mordaunt, she is a Trade Minister, currently apparently most popular amongst Tory party members, and has received the backing of the former Brexit Secretary, David Davis, this afternoon. Tom Tugendhat is chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. He launched his campaign today. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has received the backing of 2 cabinet ministers this morning. They are Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nadine Dorries outside Downing Street. Former Education Secretary and now Chancellor of the Exchequer, Nadine Zahawi. Former Local Government Minister, Kemi Badenoch, who also launched her campaign today. The former Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, the Attorney General, Suella Braverman, and Raymond Christie, who thus far has the backing of himself and no others. And the former Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, is also still in the race. Well, let's go over to Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, who is live at Westminster for this afternoon. Tom, good afternoon to you. Still fast-moving, all of this, isn't it? Just explain what we're expecting to see over the next couple of hours, because we're going to get who gets into the first round tomorrow, but the result we should know, as in who's going to be competing, later on this afternoon.
That's right, 6 p.m. is the deadline for nominations, and we know that the number arrived at by the new executive of the 1922 committee on Monday evening was 20. So 20 MPs need to back each candidate in order for those candidates to progress to tomorrow's stage in the race. 20 nominators need to be attaching their names to each of those candidates. And so far, just 4 candidates have 20 or more public backers. Those 4 candidates are Rishi Sunak in the lead, Penny Mordaunt, Tom Tugendhat and Liz Truss, just scraping in to the number 20 there. Now, we're expecting more to get more numbers because there are still over 100 Tory MPs who haven't declared who they are backing. But in terms of those public backers, it's those 4 candidates who are guaranteed a spot in tomorrow's contest. Likely some more grabbing some more names as well. And it's interesting looking at those who have dropped out. Grant Shapps dramatically dropping out this morning in order to endorse Rishi Sunak. Well, not everyone who backed Grant Shapps is following him to the former Chancellor Rishi Sunak. Paul Bristow, for example, the MP for Peterborough, was backing Grant Shapps and is now backing Liz Truss. He was the name that took her over that 20 line so that she's guaranteed to be a candidate tomorrow. Where the rest will fall, well, that's an open question. And indeed, there are many more people to go. The fact that Priti Patel has declared just in the last hour or so that she is not standing in this contest means there's another 13 MPs who had said they would back Priti Patel were she to run that can now be redistributed amongst the other candidates. Where might that fall? That is also an open question and a game to play, no doubt. One other spanner in the works, perhaps, is that the frontrunner Rishi Sunak is considerably ahead right now. And judging by previous Conservative leadership contests, sometimes what happens is the frontrunner might redistribute, might lend some of their MPs to other candidates in order to try and diversify their opposition, trying to get their opposition across the line and scrapping amongst themselves while they sail ahead. There's allegations that that's exactly what the Boris Johnson campaign did back in 2019, allegedly lending votes to Rory Stewart, the then International Development Secretary, in order to move the debate and move the gaze away from the frontrunner. Might there be some vote lending taking place later this afternoon to push forward more candidates than ordinarily may get through? That's certainly a possibility. But looking ahead to what's going on today, there's the Common Sense Caucus hustings that's taking place. The first hustings of candidates in this race, where one by one those candidates who are standing will make their case to Conservative MPs. And then that all-important date, 6 p.m. today, that's when those nominations close, when we'll know who is actually making it through to the first round of voting tomorrow.
Tom, really, really interesting stuff. We'll be across it all. Thank you very much indeed, Tom Harwood there, joining us live from Westminster this afternoon. Thank you, Tom. Well, let's talk about Labour, because its leader, Sir Keir Starmer, and his shadow cabinet have been holding their weekly meeting at Wycombe Wanderers football ground. It's Dave Beaker's seats. A bit worried about holding on to that seat. He was asked, this is Sir Keir, about Labour's plans to table a vote of no confidence. Let's have a look at what he had to say.
Well, look, we were very clear that finally the Tory party concluded that Boris Johnson was unfit to be Prime Minister. That was blindingly obvious a very long time ago. But having come to that conclusion, they can't now expect the country to allow him to cling on for weeks on end. And so it's very important. We said that if they're not going to remove him themselves, and it looks like they're not, then we would step up in the national interest and bring this vote of no confidence. And frankly, any Tory that in the last few days has said they don't think the Prime Minister's fit for office because he can't tell the truth, he can't be trusted, how can they tomorrow go through the lobby to say he should stay in power for another few weeks? I think it's very important that we step up and take whatever steps we can to remove him from office. He's unfit for that office. The reason that he is leaving office is, unlike previous Prime Ministers where it was a policy disagreement, he's leaving office because his own party have concluded that he can't be trusted. That if they go out on media with lines, those lines are going to unravel because they haven't got the substance of truth behind them. That is intolerable for the country as we go into the next weeks into September.
The Labour leader speaking a little bit earlier on today. Do get in touch, by the way, GBViews at gbnews.uk, or indeed tweet us at GBnews on who you are backing in this race. Let's speak to someone who has declared their interest. That's Andrew Morrison. He's an MP and he's backing Rishi Sunak to be the next leader. Why, Andrew?
Well, thank you for having me on. The reason I'm backing Rishi is because I think the problem for the next several months, probably years, is going to be the economy coming out of the pandemic. I think Rishi is well placed to address that. Really quite an effective Chancellor through a very difficult time. And that's really principally why I find Rishi attractive. There's a whole raft of other stuff, but I think that, for me, is the clincher.
He seemed to talk about how, he needs to get the economy back on a firm footing, laying into kind of how the other opponents weren't necessarily credible on all of this. But we have to remember, he has been Chancellor for the last couple of years. In many ways, Rishi Sunak is the continuity candidate, isn't he? If you don't like how things have been going really since 2020, you wouldn't back him, would you?
Well, I don't like the way things have been going because of the pandemic. Nobody saw that coming, but he's had to manage that. And independent commentators, like the IMF, for example, have said the UK has weathered this storm particularly well. And certainly my constituents, particularly small and medium-sized businesses in my constituency, the self-employed, low-income households, will have felt the benefit of what Rishi has done. And it is being said that he hasn't done enough to lower taxes. Well, for my constituents, particularly those who are less well off, that has certainly not been the case. He has been, I think, as generous as he possibly can, given that we've necessarily had to spend a whole shed load of money dealing with this pandemic, and I expect more of that in the future.
Those Conservative members, frankly, to quite a few of our viewers as well, who like Boris Johnson and feel that Rishi Sunak has somewhat stabbed the Prime Minister in the back, that he's helped bring about this Prime Minister's downfall, and that they just simply couldn't back him because of that.
Yeah, well, let's nail that one, should we? I went to see Rishi at my request some months ago, I think around about the turn of the year. And I said to Rishi, look, I'm really unhappy with the way things are going and the rolling chaos that appears to be number 10 right now, and it falls to you as Chancellor to grip this and deal with the situation. He listened to me very politely, but he showed me no ankle whatsoever when pressed, and I came away knowing full well that he was completely loyal to the Prime Minister at that point. So I speak as I find, and I was really impressed. He went up even further in my estimation.
In saying that, again, one of the reasons the Prime Minister, Andrew, has lost his job is because he was found to have broken the law while in government as Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak was also found to have broken the law. He got fined by the Metropolitan Police. He did not resign on that issue. Many people will feel uncomfortable with, a new leader who essentially has broken the law while in one of the top jobs in government.
Yes, and he's accepted that fixed penalty notice as he should have done, and he has apologised. I think any reasonable person looking at the facts of this particular matter will see that he arrived 15 minutes early for a meeting in the Cabinet room. There are apparently a few sandwiches and soft drinks on the table to mark the Prime Minister's birthday, and he had a Coke. And he's accepted the fine. He's I hope, apologised as profusely as he possibly can. I think now we need to move on that.
And just very finally, clearly key to the Conservatives' electoral success in 2019 was the Red Wall, was those voters, Labour voters, won over, weren't they, by Boris Johnson to back the Conservatives in seats that literally had not been Conservative before. Can Rishi Sunak do that, given potentially his economic outlook in terms of low tax as a fiscally disciplined Conservative, but in addition to that, someone who is personally himself incredibly wealthy? Do you think that those former Labour voters would stick with the Conservatives as Rishi as leader?
Yeah. Well, look, I think they're going to want to know what he's going to do for them. They're not particularly bothered about his background. Certainly I'm not interested so much in that. I'm interested in what he's going to do going forward. And if you look at the polling data, Darren, it's pretty clear that Rishi is the unity candidate. He appeals in the north, he appeals in the south. That's important. We've got a slate of really good candidates, and if I can say so, I'd be happy with any one of them as Prime Minister. But I have to make a choice, and for me, that's a no-brainer, and that's Rishi Sunak.
Does that extend to Raymond Tristy as well?
I don't think. Look, I know Raymond. He's a really nice guy and a friend of mine. I honestly don't think he's going to make progress in this. So I'm really speaking about the mainstream candidates. But no disrespect to Raymond.
Indeed, I couldn't help but poke a little fun. Andrew, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time this afternoon. Andrew Morrison there, joining us live from outside Westminster. OK, you're watching GB News. You're watching The Briefing. We are talking about the Conservative leadership race. Next couple of hours, we're going to find out who is going to be in the first round. But are they committed, many of them, to those net zero commitments that clearly Boris Johnson's been to? Talk about that and a hell of a lot more in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
Very welcome back. Now, battlegrounds have been drawn over net zero commitments in the Conservative leadership race, with some candidates, including Kemi Badenoch and Suella Braverman, signaling their opposition to the UK's flagship net zero goals. But the Environment Minister, Lord Zach Goldsmith, has warned the party would be digging our electoral grave if it scraps its climate commitments. Well, delighted to say, joining me in the studio is the former Conservative MP, Michael Stevens, who is with me. Michael, good afternoon to you. First of all, on this issue of net zero by 50, Boris Johnson has been pretty steadfast, actually, in that commitment throughout his premiership. He took a leading role at COP26. It seems that some in the party, though, want that commitment to be at least challenged, if I put it politely.
Yes. I think we have to be realistic about net zero. We have to proceed at a pace that the economy can sustain. And at the present time, green taxes and subsidies are not welcomed by people who are struggling to make ends meet. And also, we need to proceed at a pace that our energy policy can deliver the electricity that we need. If we're going to go into electric cars, then we need some electricity. When I was an MP, I went to see Sizewell B, which had just been finished, the nuclear power station in Suffolk. I went straight back to Westminster and said to the government, you really need to build Sizewell C, because you're going to run out of energy in about 20 years' time. And thankfully, they've now, very late in the day, decided to build it. But I think there's also a doubt in my mind about the basic premise. After all, the most powerful influence on the climate of this Earth is the sun. And the power of the sun is not stable. So you would expect the climate to change as it has been doing for millions of years. And the extent to which human beings have any influence over that is a matter for debate. And also the extent to which, if that is so, this country's efforts and the huge sacrifices that we're making is going to make any difference. So this is a station, a television station that doesn't go in for the cancel culture. So I would like to see a debate on your station between two people who really know what they're talking about, arguing for and against the proposition that human beings have any significant influence on climate change.
Well, I mean, to many people, it seems to most scientists anyway, that debate is settled, is that there is influence, and in terms of kind of the impact that human beings have on the planet. I mean, there's lots of science around that. We'll not get into that debate right now. I want to talk about the politics, if I can, a little bit. Let's park that debate, which many people think is settled, because kind of Zach Goldsmith's kind of thing, kind of line is that electorally, if the Conservatives start having that debate, they'll just lose lots of voters.
Well, I'm not sure. I think the British people are very realistic people. And, you know, we don't live in the Middle Ages where if you challenge the conventional wisdom, you got burnt at the stake. No, but I think we can have
but at the same time, we don't
an open debate about this.
We can, but we don't also believe, we're not in the Middle Ages where we necessarily believe kind of pseudoscience either. I mean, in the sense that clearly most of the scientific community, most global leaders, most politicians within the Conservative Party believe the science is pretty rock solid in all of this. There's quite a lot of evidence for it. That's my point. My point is you're challenging the status quo, which is absolutely fine and legitimate. My problem is, if for the Conservative Party to do that, would that cost them at the ballot box?
I don't think so, especially if they heard a balanced, informed debate on your television programme.
Well, I mean, we're perfectly willing to have that. But my point is, I'm not entirely sure how this feeds into... Well, that's not going to change the electoral politics overnight for a Conservative leadership race.
No, absolutely not. But one of the businesses I've always thought of a Conservative MP, or any MP, is not just to deal with the day-to-day problems that his constituents have, but to be thinking 5 to 10 years in the future and trying to guide the national debate in a positive direction.
So, but you want to have this argument, you have to have this debate. I mean, I assume you're not going to take part in the debate, are you?
No, I haven't been asked to put my name forward to be the next Prime Minister.
I meant on the climate change debate.
On the climate change.
I mean, what are your credentials for weighing into this?
Yeah, my credentials are...
You just read lots of stuff.
An interested bystander. Okay. Who would like to see people who really know what they're talking about argue it out on your programme.
OK, well, we will see about that. OK, Michael, as always, thank you very much indeed. Michael Stephen there, joining us live in the studio. Let's turn back to the leadership race now and speak to Conservative MP James Daly, who's backing Tom Tugendhat for leader. Tom, who obviously launched his campaign a little bit earlier on today in Westminster. James, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Why are you backing Mr Tugendhat?
I think he has a great vision for the country. He's a good friend of mine, and he talked about the North. He talked about levelling up. He talked about the Northern Research Group, which I'm a part of. To me, the government's policy of levelling up, of investing in a bespoke manner in projects throughout the north of England is having a really positive impact. And Tom's taking that agenda forward. And he's also answered my questions to him were immigration, were his attitude towards the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill. So on all these big policy questions, but also the things that matter to my constituents in Bury, Tom's right there.
In saying that, he's never actually served, obviously, in government. Now, that's true of lots of politicians. You can point to leaders of the opposition who've never been in government, David Cameron, Tony Blair, etc. But they were leaders of the opposition. This would be an enormous step up for someone who's not served within government to suddenly become not just Conservative leader, but Prime Minister.
Oh, come on, Darren. You're either up to it or you're not. If he can't do it, I'm sure
James,
we'll see very quickly. He's an
yeah,
army
but that's an
officer.
interesting.
But Darren, you're falling into the trap. What that means, Darren, is that people with no talent, people with talent should be kept out of politics or standing for office or thinking they can offer something. Tom is an honest, straightforward guy. We've got some great, experienced candidates in this. But he was an army officer. He's a man who knows how to deliver. So I don't think that is an issue at all, in my view.
Well, but it might not be in your view, but you say he's up to it. But the point was, we don't know that. He's never served within government. It's quite a big risk for the country to say, well, we'll just trust a couple of people that he's up to it. I mean, he'll literally be in charge of the country. And it's not like fighting a war. It's making big decisions on the health service, on education, on the economy, which, let's be honest about it, he's not been tested on.
Well, hopefully he'll soon be tested. I think he's got that. I spent a lot of time with him. He's a good friend of mine. He's an intelligent, articulate man. He believes in this country. He believes in every single person in this country. And I think he's got the backstory, the experience, the intelligence, the drive, the determination to deliver for everyone. As you quite rightly say, Darren, that if the cut-off for people wanting to stand for anything or get any type of job, if they haven't experienced that, then that's going to rule a lot of people out from stepping up to a role which is perhaps more senior to what they've been in. He's a good guy, and that's why I'm backing him, and he's a good friend of mine.
Just in terms of, let's look at some policy kind of detail. In terms of taxation, we've heard an awful lot, haven't we, from Sajid Javid and Nadeem Zahawi and others who want to cut tax. According to Rishi Sunak, those are fairy tales or kind of cakeism. Where is Tom in terms of the big taxation question, which seems the kind of almost totemic question of this leadership campaign?
Well, at the launch this morning, he highlighted that he'd take 10 pence off fuel duty. He highlighted that he'd reverse the national insurance increase. So I think he's identifying taxes that we can immediately take action on that are both affordable and things that bolster our economy, put more money in people's pockets. But also, Darren, if you'll forgive me, one of the things I've talked about at great length is clean air zones. So I did overhear some of the conversation you just had with your previous speaker. Clean air zones throughout this country need to be scrapped. And the reason for that is that you cannot penalise people for going to work in a cost of living crisis. And so there are targeted stances you can take which are going to make a real difference to the money that people have in their pockets. And so in Greater Manchester in particular, I'm hoping, and Tom has given me a commitment, that he supports me to ensure that we don't have a Greater Manchester clean air zone.
Just in terms of other issues, he's going to stick with the Rwanda plan, I believe that's right. What's he going to do on the Northern Ireland Protocol? Because at the moment, for a candidate who's talking about being a clean slate, it seems pretty consistent with what the government's been doing.
Well, listen, one of the things that recommends good candidates is they support good policies. The Northern Ireland Protocol is an absolutely much-needed bill. It protects our union. It allows the free trade between all regions of the United Kingdom. So, again, Darren, I'm not going to criticise anybody who comes in, looks at the range of policies and says, yeah, the government have got it right on this, and I believe fundamentally to my soul they have. And I think the other thing, Darren, that we need to say in respect of that, Tom shares my view that there is no breach of international law. The government are exactly right in doing what they're doing.
And just very finally, I mean, this is a kind of big if, obviously, but if Tom doesn't make it through, who alternatively would you like to see as the leader?
Do you know, one of the great things, Tom, Darren, is that we've got some fantastic candidates. I for my sins, watch basketball. I've just got into it at night
good
watching
sport,
about
it's
the
a good
Dream
sport.
Team. Do you remember the Dream Team at the 1992 Olympics? This is what we've got. We've got the Dream Team. We've got Magic Johnson. We've got Michael Jordan. We've got all of them there. So whoever from the Conservative Party gets elected as leader, I will support them completely. They're all brilliant and a million times better than Keir Starmer, which is the main thing.
James, as always, appreciate your time. Thank you very much. We'll see how it goes. We'll get you back on, irrespective of the results. James Daly, they're live at Westminster. Thank you very much. OK, it's just after 3:30. We're going to take a quick break here on GB News and the briefing. But before that, let's bring you up to date with the best news headlines just after 3:30 this afternoon.
It's 3:33. Good afternoon. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. Well, pressure is on for Tory leadership candidates to secure enough nominations to formally enter the race to replace Boris Johnson. Home Secretary Priti Patel says she won't be standing. The Transport Secretary Grant Shapps has bowed out and is now backing former Chancellor Rishi Sunak. It leaves 10 current contenders who need the support of 20 MPs by 6 p.m. today. Meanwhile, the Labour Party has put forward a motion to hold a confidence vote in the government. The official opposition says Boris Johnson should have left number 10 immediately after he resigned as Tory leader last week. If the ballot goes ahead, possibly tomorrow, all MPs will vote on whether the Conservatives stay in power. A loss for the government could trigger a general election. In some other news now, Heathrow Airport has introduced a cap on the number of daily passengers that can pass through its terminals. The measure's been introduced as the airline industry struggles to deal with demand. So between July and September, no more than 100,000 passengers will be able to depart from the airport in West London on any given day. Japan has said goodbye to its former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was assassinated last week. Amid a heavy police presence, close family and friends of Japan's longest-serving premier attended a private funeral service in Tokyo. Abe was shot when he was making a speech at a campaign event. After the ceremony, a hearse carrying the body was accompanied by police on a procession throughout the city. The Queen has presented the George Cross to the NHS at Windsor Castle. The monarch and Prince Charles welcomed NHS bosses and a frontline worker from each of the 4 UK nations. The award recognises acts of great heroism and courage in the face of extreme danger. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's market. The pound will buy you $1.187 and 1.180 euros. The price of gold currently stands at £1,457 and 9 pence per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Very welcome back to GB News. It is 22 minutes to 4 o'clock on this Tuesday afternoon. We're on TV, online and, of course, on your wireless radios as well. Thank you very much indeed. Lots of you getting in touch about the Conservative leadership race. Deborah says, I'm backing Kemi and Sewella because after Penny backed Jeremy Hunt in 2019, I don't trust her not to have him in her cabinet. Carl says, how can Rishi go for this? He was fined like Boris, so why is he any different? The Labour Party would not let it go and be back to square one. And Matthew says he would like to see Penny Mordaunt for Prime Minister. GB Views, gbnews.uk. Let me know who you are backing in this leadership race. Well, as we've been hearing, the list of people hoping to replace Boris Johnson has thinned a little bit today, with Grant Shapps pulling out and Priti Patel confirming she won't stand. But Rishi Sunak, the former Chancellor, whose resignation last week helped bring about the Prime Minister's downfall, did give a speech this morning, as did two other hopefuls, Kemi Badenoch and Tom Tugendhat. In a moment, we'll ask the Tory insider Joanna Nadler about how they did and her assessment of it. But first, let's look back at those three candidates and what they had to say.
We need to have a grown-up conversation about the central policy question that all candidates have to answer in this election. Do you have a credible plan to protect our economy and get it growing? My message to the party and the country is simple. I have a plan to steer our economy through these headwinds. We need a return to traditional Conservative economic values, and that means honesty and responsibility, not fairy tales. As is the fact that once we've gripped inflation, I will get the tax burden down. It is a question of when, not if.
For too long, politicians have been telling us that we can have it all, that you can have your cake and eat it. And I'm here to tell you that that isn't true. It never has been. There are always tough choices in life and in politics. No free lunches, no tax cuts without limits on government spending, no stronger defence without a slimmer state. Governing involves trade-offs, and we need to start being honest about that. Unlike others, I'm not going to promise you things without a plan to deliver them. People are sick of that. They're crying out for honesty.
I'm sorry, but I cannot accept retreat. We should not accept retreat. We must return to service. We need leadership with a renewed sense of mission. Leadership that sees beyond divisive politics and delivers results. Leadership that will return government to the service of our economy, our people, and our country. We need a clean start.
Well, joining me now is Joanne Nadler. Good afternoon to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's start, first of all, in order, since we've just been watching them. Let's start with Rishi Sunak. What were your impressions of his launch this morning?
I mean, there's no denying that Rishi Sunak is a very compelling personality, and he makes a very strong case, I think, for the leadership, because he does communicate authority, and he did hold such an important office of state at a very critical point for the country. And I think that is really the kind of the dynamic that his team are wanting to get on board with and wanting people to support him for. And obviously, he's drawn a strong contingent of his fellow MPs already supporting him. And they're not just what you might call the usual suspects. It was an impressive launch. Nevertheless, one can't get past the fact that many people will see him as having been too involved with the current regime, the current government, too much involved with some of those measures around lockdown and a very, very high spending agenda, which is in part, if not wholly, led to where we are economically.
Yeah, isn't it interesting in some ways? It's almost a pincer movement, against Rishi, in the sense that he might get blamed for the government's record and at the same time also got blamed for helping bring it down, or the Prime Minister down.
Yes, and in a sense, both. He has to be accountable for both of those things. It's a tricky one. I personally don't think that he should be criticised for making the move against the Prime Minister, because that had been welling for such a long time, and somebody, if you like, had to make that step. And in the end, actually, he was ever so slightly beaten to it, wasn't he, by Sajid Javid. So I think that, frankly, that is a foolish thing to focus on at the moment. I think the important thing for the electorate, which is the MPs in the first instance, to think about here is, which of these candidates will make a better job of being the Prime Minister? Which of them has the better policy platform? And which of them is able to comport themselves through this process without being too critical of others?
Let's talk about Kemi Badenoch, because up until very, very recently, most people will not have really heard much about her. She's clearly got lots of enthusiastic supporters. Michael Gove was there today. I was at her lunch. She seemed pretty confident, pretty assured, and at times actually very funny.
I mean, I think this was perhaps the moment for me to say that I've sort of come out in support for Kemi, because I think she's actually the outstanding candidate. I think she represents somebody who is extremely thoughtful and, as you say, thinks very quickly on her feet. She's adept, so she can hold something as challenging as a press conference in the way that she did today. But the important thing, it seems to me, about Kemi is that she is able to articulate some very big ideas about conservatism, about freedom, and then she's able to kind of explain how these would affect day-to-day policies and exactly what her government would do. So I've been very impressed with her. I didn't come into this leadership race with a favoured candidate necessarily. I was inclined towards her, but I think she's actually been outstanding since the start of this race. There's a long way to go, of course, but I'm very impressed by her.
Should we have some praise for Tom Tugendhat as well, in the sense that, he is doing pretty well compared to some big kind of cabinet beasts at his wing of the party, people like Grant Shapps, who's now dropped out, Jeremy Hunt, who's not performing terribly well. He has led a pretty impressive campaign.
Yeah, I mean, I think he got off to a good start because he was able to pull behind him different wings of the party. So he didn't look to be presenting a particularly partisan case. And I think, it's both to his advantage and disadvantage that he is so relatively inexperienced, that he hasn't been in government. I mean, obviously, for many people, they will hold that against him. Although, again, I actually think that's not the reason to criticise him. I actually rather agreed with your previous guest, James Daly, wasn't it, I think, who said, look, give the guy a chance. He has got an impressive background in leadership, albeit not in political leadership. But that doesn't mean that he hasn't got a lot to prove. It shouldn't be held against him, but it's nevertheless still quite a steep learning curve for him. And I think inevitably it's going to be difficult for him to make the case that he is experienced enough. I also think perhaps he needs to relax a bit. He seemed very kind of serious and portentous through his press conference. Of course, it's a serious business, don't get me wrong. But he was a little bit stiff, perhaps not as assured as the others that we've seen this morning.
And I hate putting people in this position. What are your predictions, though? How do you think this is going to play out over the next couple of days? And who do you think is going to end up in the final two?
I mean, I've watched a lot of these leadership races over the decades now. And to me, this is one of the most interesting and also one of the most open. And I think it's still genuinely very difficult to say. I mean, most people assume that Rishi Sunak will make the final two, possibly with Liz Truss. But I think we've seen already people are being surprised by some of the perhaps lesser-known candidates like Kemi Badenoch. And I think there's still a great deal to play for. I mean, what's going to be very interesting to see is how, when they get through the first round tomorrow, where the support then folds into. So whoever drops out, where will their support go? And it's not obvious to me at the moment that there is a particular likely candidate that will go out tomorrow that will transfer en masse all of their votes to somebody else. So I'm not a betting person, actually, Darren, and I'm going to now hedge my bets and not commit really at this stage to the final two, just to say that I very much hope that Kemi will be in the final two, because I think she represents a very serious new start for the Conservative Party at a very critical moment in its history.
Yeah, pretty brave person, maybe a little foolish trying to predict things at this stage. Joanne, as always, thank you very much indeed for your time. Joanne Nadler there joining us down the line. Let's turn now to another big story today, and that is that more than 1,000 people have crossed the English Channel less than a week after an international operation to disrupt a people smuggling network started. That's what we can reveal here at GB News. We can speak now to our Home Affairs and Security Editor, Mark White, who, of course, has been across this story for years, frankly. Mark, I think
far
it's
too long.
Far too long. Just explain, though, 1,000 people, and this is despite the extra efforts that have been put involved.
Yes, so last Wednesday we had an international operation involving arrests that took place in France, in Germany, in the Netherlands, and here in the UK. 39 people were rounded up. They we're told, part of a people smuggling network responsible, according to the authorities, for smuggling some 10,000 people into the UK over recent months. In addition to that, they also recovered 135 small boats, 1,200 life jackets, 45 outboard motors. And what the authorities said is that this would have an impact on the supply of small boats to these people smugglers in the short term. But what have we? We've had less than a week now, 6 days since this operation, and more than 1,000 people. 442 came across yesterday in 15 small boats. And again, there's multiple small boat activity out in the Channel. 150 have been brought ashore so far, more boats being intercepted as we speak.
And as the weather only gets better in many regards, or it stays relatively stable, those numbers not likely to diminish. And James Heappey, I think, has been talking about this in Parliament, hasn't he?
Yes, the Armed Forces Minister has been talking about the command and control function that the armed forces have been able to offer the operations in the Channel. He was asked whether that had been a success, and he said yes, from his point of view, it had been, because they are not about, in the function that they've taken on, stopping the boats coming, but purely acting as a control measure for those coming across into British waters to ensure that they are then intercepted and those people are taken ashore safely. And he has said that so far that operation has worked well. This is what he told Tobias Ellwood, chairman of the Defence Select Committee.
Since defence took primacy, only one migrant boat has landed in the UK in an uncontrolled way. And we define uncontrolled as in we were not physically escorting it, or we hadn't intercepted it and cross-decked people at sea. And even the boat that arrived in what we would describe as an uncontrolled way landed in the vicinity of Tugendhat power station, and the nuclear civil police were able to intercept them.
So that really sounds impressive. It sounds like you've got the channel under control.
Tobias, you're not going to tempt me to say such grand things, because I just think, you know, a run of still days, you know, would test us. Of course it would.
There you go. That was James Heappey speaking in Parliament a little bit earlier. And James, Mark, also within the last couple of hours, we've heard Priti Patel, someone you know very well, said it not to run for the leadership of the Conservative Party.
Yeah, she's been keeping us all waiting.
Yeah.
Many people had tipped her for a run at the leadership a little earlier on, but as the days moved on, it looked increasingly likely that she wasn't going to run, and she has confirmed that she is not going to put her hat in the ring. She's clearly decided that she's better off where she is, but there's no guarantee that she'll still be the Home Secretary under whoever is the next Prime Minister, because just what we've been talking about, this issue of small boats coming across the Channel, has plagued her. She's, over the months, tried multiple different solutions, as she saw it, to the problem. She introduced, as you'll remember, the turn-back policy that was never actually formally implemented, despite them buying these jet skis for Border Force personnel to turn the boats back. It was seen as too dangerous, so they decided not to go ahead with that. Also, of course, the Rwanda policy at the moment, which has not even seen a single flight take off for Rwanda, mired in legal proceedings at the moment. So,
and it's clearly not itself acting as a deterrent.
Yeah.
I mean, it will be fascinating to see whether she remains as Home Secretary after all this.
Yeah.
Mark, as always, thank you very much indeed. Mark White, our Home Affairs and Security Editor, and delighted to say that I'm squeezed at the moment between two broadcasting legends, Mark White. Two broadcasting beauties, Mark White to my right and Colin Brazier.
It's a pincer movement, Darren.
To my left. You're on in a couple of minutes, Colin. Conservative leadership race, I'm sure, will pop up in the programme. What are your thoughts on all of this? I mean, it is a pretty eclectic, diverse field.
Well, do you know what? I don't have many original thoughts, so I rely on others to have them for me. And the point Mark was just making about Priti Patel, if you'd said a week ago, I mean, people behave sometimes in your tribe, the political editors and correspondents tribe, as if politics is a sort of exact science. It's so not an exact science. And if you'd said a week ago that Priti Patel wouldn't make it to the runoffs, that even that Nadine Zahawi wouldn't, that Jeremy Hunt wouldn't, and somebody called Kemi Badenoch would, and that Tom Tugendhat would already be through, you wouldn't have believed them.
No, and it is interesting that those kind of outsiders, in many ways, have led a very impressive campaign to date. I think what I also find interesting is the sense there's clearly a movement within the Conservative Party who feel that they do want a so-called clean start, that they want to move beyond the current cabinet for whatever reason, and they want MPs as outsiders. But I do come back to this point that I was putting to James Daly earlier on, is a little bit of a risk because, you know, these people aren't just becoming leaders of their own party, they're literally going to become the Prime Minister.
But is it not down also, and this is why it's so fascinating, a tussle for the ideological soul of the Conservative Party? I had Rod Liddle on yesterday afternoon at 4 o'clock, and he said, look, forget the tax cuts. This is about, pure and simple, the culture wars. And we sometimes think, don't we, the culture wars are just something that the pointy-headed types do on Twitter. He says, no, this is what it's about now. This leadership election, whether it's Kemi standing for a set of values, whether it's Liz Truss, or whether it's about old-fashioned tax cutting, it's ideology front and centre first and foremost.
OK, Colin, we will be tuning in a couple of minutes, top of the hour, 4 o'clock. Thank you very much indeed. That is it from us for today. Just to remind you, though, we are expecting to get the final total of who is going to take part in that leadership race in the first round ballot at 6 o'clock this afternoon. The 1922 committee are going to announce that live in Parliament. We'll have coverage of that, of course, here on GB News. I'll be with you bits and bobs throughout the rest of the afternoon. That is it, as I say, from me for today. Tom is here at 9:30 in the morning. Gloria at 12. I'll be back at 3. It is Prime Minister Boris Johnson's penultimate PMQs tomorrow as well. Colin's up next, but we'll leave you with the weather this afternoon. And while it might get a little cooler in the days to come, it's going to get very, very hot at the weekend. Here's the Met Office with the details.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Very warm once again this afternoon in the south, but it has turned a bit cooler further north, although most places are fine. It's a decent sunny day for the vast majority. It is cloudier, however, compared to the last couple of days, courtesy of a cold front which has moved in. It's brought some rain to the northwest earlier on, but it's weakening all the while, and really as we head into the evening, just a few spots of rain affecting parts of Wales and the Midlands, and then most places dry overnight. 1 or 2 showers into the north of Scotland, a brisk breeze here, the cloud further south tending to break up, so some clear spells by dawn. But it's a warm night in the south, 17 to 19 Celsius, cooler further north, 11 to 13 degrees for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. Into the start of Wednesday then, warm